Chapter 5. Arrival. Alice had technically never been aboard a vessel entering an atmosphere, nor had landed on the surface of a planet before. The turbulence was supposedly less than it would have been returning to Earth, but it unsettled him nonetheless. By the time the ship had landed in the port of Zelmas, his nerves had settled, possibly due to the nip of tequila that he had kept in his jacket pocket, which went down smoother than it had at his father's wake a month ago. He chalked it up to the increased stress. All of the passengers disembarked singularly, but he noticed that some of the humans seemed closer than they had been at the beginning of the transit. A month was a long time to spend with others without becoming emotionally engaged. He smiled inwardly at this, but without any feeling of longing others might feel for the lack of companionship. The reception area was sparsely populated with the friends and families of the passengers, and Owls moved slowly through the reunifications as he made his way to the exit, rucksack already in hand. Others made their way to the adjacent wing to gather their myriad cases and shipments being brought from another portal in the newly arrived vessel. Owls paused before exiting, thinking back to the time of his youth when Tyrus was still a barren world. Without an atmosphere one could breathe, let alone walk under the light of the sun. Now, as he paused through the doors that had only recently been converted from an airlock, he took his first deep breath of the brisk, biting air, expecting to taste it for the first time and to embed in his memory this moment. Instead, behind his closed eyes, he saw images of walking down pedestrian-filled streets under the pale sky of Tyros, and the blue-green fields of the grass analog that the Manisae had planted, none of which he had personally seen. Al sighed in resignation that the unfamiliar world inevitably would be familiar to him here, and decided to try to see things with fresh eyes, if not unknown. It only took a moment for Alls to realize he was blocking the exit, so he sidled quickly to the side of the doorway to let others pass. Looking around the pentagonal plaza, there were no obvious street designations indicating where he might find transportation to the estate, but there were occasional groups of benches that he could stop at to think of his next steps. He proceeded to claim one, only to hear his name from behind. "Alls, wait one moment." He didn't need to turn to see who was coming up behind him. There were only two people who knew him by that name. One was Shikse, the other Rez. Thankfully, the voice in question originated from the latter. Not that Shikse wasn't a welcome companion, and possibly very handy in this situation, but something felt better about more familiar company in this already alien setting. She caught up with him a moment later as he turned to greet her. "Are you going for something to eat, or do you want to head straight for your estate?" "I had thought to head straight there, but now that I'm here, I'm not sure exactly how to get there. I guess I assumed that there would be some sort of taxi analog that I could hire. But now that you mention it, it would be nice to take a beat with a meal. You've been here. Do you know of a place to go?" "Of course," she smiled. "It's a walk, but nothing to worry about in lower grav. We'll be there soon if we start now." "Lead on." He gestured for her to take the lead. Instead, she weaved her arm through his elbow, and they skip-walked along the corridors of the city toward their destination. Alls felt like a child walking that way, but given the lighter pull of the ground and something about Rez, he felt immune to embarrassment at the moment. They arrived at a literal hole in the wall about 10 minutes later, and as they proceeded to slightly duck through the round opening in the earthen structure, they found that it opened up into a fairly familiar cantina setting, complete with booth seating. They dropped their bags at the entryway and installed themselves opposite each other in one such nook. Rez took the lead again in ordering 2 plates of a variety of colors and textures that turned out to be, mostly, quite tasty. The Manisae were generalists technically, but they seemed to have evolved from some type of tree-dwelling insectivorous animal, and so their cuisine leaned heavily on vegetarian and insect-based proteins. It reminded him of some of the salad spreads that he'd enjoyed on a trip to Jaffa years ago, various hummuses and spice-based pastes garnished with salads and oils. One thing that Rez had, until then, taken the lead on was conversation. And this she was quiet, preferring to let Alls talk. She asked him about his first impressions of the city, the smells and tastes. This line of inquiry eventually led to sharing his experience of familiarity, despite his never having been there before. When pressed, he admitted and detailed the events preceding his father's wake. Her eyes were wide throughout his reliving of his father's memories through the memory crystal. He told her everything but the focus on the statue in the study, even the part about him waking up encrusted in snot and tears. This was very unlike him to open up to someone he had only recently met, and he found himself shaking slightly as he finished. They sat in silence for a long minute afterward. She seemed to start to say something a few times, but apparently changed her mind mid-word and sat back. Eventually, she gathered her thoughts enough to put them into words. I never expected the experience to be like that. Of all of the things I've read about the crystals, nothing was ever described relating to the experience of the memory transfer. I always just assumed it was more like watching a film of the person's life. Not so invasive. No, that's not the right word. Intimate, maybe? Al's nodded at the term. Intimate was how it felt, and possibly a bit invasive too. His thoughts turned to recent moments when he felt himself doing something or saying something that wasn't quite what he normally would have done. Perhaps it was an effect of the added perspective of his father's life, or perhaps his father's life was at some level affecting his own personality. He wondered offhand what Hildy and Ehrenfeld were experiencing, each with different eras of their father's life, memories to experience and subsume. Bringing his attention back to the present, Al's frowned slightly and offered to pay for the meal, only to be rebuked by Rez. Something about her choice, his mind still clouded by his thoughts moments ago, and uncharacteristically reliving his experiences. Rising, he made his apologies, but had the wherewithal to ask for directions. Just go a few hundred meters uphill from here. You'll find a tram that will take you in the direction you need to go, Rez offered. Then, as he turned absent-mindedly and lifted his rucksack to leave, he heard her say, Another time? Though he was already too far past the entrance to respond. The rest of the day passed in a blur, his body taking him where he needed to go without much conscious thought, to the tram platform and then onto the vaguely familiar car to take him in the direction of his destination.